Business of Tech podcast host Dave Sobel joins us this week to break down news from Acronis and Kaseya, 4 thoughts on the future of tech and security, and more, plus a special guest interview with Channelnomics CEO Larry Walsh on the meaning and importance of customer experience. It's ChannelPro Weekly number 204, Hard Stuff Makes Money. Hello and welcome to ChannelPro Weekly episode 204. My name is Matt Whitlock, technology editor, online director, and your host of this show for people like you, the VARs, the integrators, the MSPs, the IT consultants, the people who do businessy technology things. That's a word, by the way, businessy. I just made it up. In fact, it might be in the dictionary. And if it's not, I'm going to try to get it put in the dictionary. Business stuff, technology with other businesses. If that describes you, you are in the right place. If you are a wild lion tamer, you're going to have fun on this show anyway, because we have an awesome guest. We're going to get to him in just a minute. But joining me each and every week is the man of the hour, the man who makes ChannelPro run on time and gives you all that good stuff to read every week. Executive editor, Rich Friedman. Welcome, Rich.
Hello there, Matt. I'm back home.
You're back home today. You've been kind of on the road the last few episodes. Were you out at Wild Lion Taming School? Is that where you were at?
No, actually, and our guest house was where I was most recently, and they have all sorts of amenities at this very, very fancy hotel where the event we attended took place, but no lions, no lion taming courses that I came across, at least.
Well, that was your former career as a zoologist and circus animal trainer. What made you get away from that, Rich?
Well, this is why I only have one arm, and I had to move on, and I am the fastest one-handed typer you've ever met.
That's awesome stuff. So who's that cackling in the background? That is our guest today. I'm so excited to have him back. He's the Senior Director of Marketing for MSP Radio, a leading expert on IT and managed services, cloud computing, and virtualization. He's a featured speaker at many industry events, including some of our own, and author of the book, Virtualization Defined. Please welcome back Mr. Dave Sobel. Welcome, Dave.
Well, thank you. Also known as sometimes minor background chatter, which is another, and resident loudmouth over on the Business of Tech, which is what I do every single day. So yeah, thanks for having me back, guys.
It's always great when you're on, because it's always fun having another podcast host on, because like whenever you're a guest on someone else's podcast, it's like really hard not to just settle in and kind of take over. And when you're on, I can just kind of sit back and I just know that the show's going to work.
We're good to go. Like we can hand off back and forth. You need to step off. No problem. I'm good to go to cover some time.
It's all good. So for those who are not familiar with you, tell us a little bit about you and what you do over there at MSP Radio.
Well, I like long walks on the beach. I like good food and travel. Oh, you meant the business stuff. So I ran an MSP for a decade. I was a multi-time channel chief, ran channel programs and channel engagements. So it was 10 years, then another 8 doing vendor stuff. And over the last 2 years, I have been running a media company, covering news and commentary for IT service providers from very much the sense of what they need to know to execute in their businesses. And I'm very focused on trends like changes in the world of work, what's going on in the diversity space, some of the challenges in regulation and in security, like some of these big picture issues that we see from a management perspective and how those IT services companies can address it.
And you have multiple shows over there at MSP Radio, but you don't host all of them. Which do you just still do the Business of Tech, or do you have any other ones? I'm
also on the show Killing It, which is a weekly show. If Business of Tech is Sports Center, then Killing It is Pardon the Interruption, where three of us debate issues each week. It's a tight 30 with 3 topics. And then, of course, MSP Radio is now a network. We have multiple shows on the network as well. So Carl Polachuk and his SMB Community podcast, and we just had Todd Kane and his Evolved Radio podcast just joined the network. So it's an ever expanding way of people that are focused on the community of IT service providers.
Love it. Awesome stuff. And the Business of Tech is a great podcast. I do try to listen to it frequently, at least as often as I can. I highly, if you like Channel Pro Weekly, you'll also like Business of Tech. Definitely check it out. Good stuff. So Rich, we're kind of running a little tight on time, so I don't want to waste too much time in the beginning here and kind of dive into the news, because we got a lot of stuff to get into. And I know Dave is itching to get to one of them, which I think is our last story. So let's see if we can work our way there. Consolidating vendors and integrating solutions pays off, says Acronis. Tell us about that.
So I should say one of the reasons we always enjoy having Dave on the show for all the reasons you said, Matt, but I kind of slotted him in for this week in particular because he and I are both just home from Miami, where Acronis did their CyberFit summit event for 2021. And we were not only at the same show. We were on the same stage together for about an hour. Acronis did some research, some MSP research in partnership with ChannelPro, I should say. I collaborated with them on the questions that they asked. And Dave was the moderator of a panel in which we discussed those results. So, and there are tons of results in this study, really, really interesting data. Let me just kind of hit some of the highlights here, and then we can kind of get Dave's take on it. The sort of headline number, I mean, literally the headline number in the press release about this research was that MSPs who consolidate and integrate their security and their BDR tools get tangible results from that. So consolidating vendors, fewer security and BDR vendors, saves on average $229,159, according to the 400 MSPs surveyed in the study.
They should have gotten much more specific with that number. I need it down to the penny or it's no good.
Yeah. You know, they rounded off. They were feeling a little lazy. They rounded it off. Integrating, so that's consolidating fewer vendors. Integrating the tools that you have reduces the time required to recover from a breach by an average of 5 hours. So you're going to be faster dealing with incidents when they happen. You're going to spend less on security and BDR, according to the MSPs surveyed in this study. If you have fewer vendors and the vendors you're working with, you know, their tools are highly integrated with one another. Interesting statistic. I know Dave has really interesting thoughts on this, so I'm just going to kind of move on and let him chime in. But just to set the stage for why MSPs are consolidating and integrating their tools. Well, for one thing, we know the threat landscape out there is especially treacherous right now, so much so that 53% of the MSPs in the survey say they don't completely trust the vendors they currently work with and their tools to keep customers safe. And 49% of them don't completely trust the services they themselves provide to customers. They don't trust themselves completely to secure their end users because it's so difficult to do right now. And this gets worse, by the way. There's evidence that the smaller you are as an MSP, the harder time you're having keeping your customers safe. The Acronis folks, you know, broke down the data by the size of the MSP involved. 56% of the poll respondents who have 1 to 4 employees have a client who suffered a brute force attack in the last year. 56%. For the largest ones in the study with 50 to 99 employees, that drops all the way down to 39%. 48% of the 1 to 4 employee MSPs have a client struck by a 0-day in the last year. Drops all the way down to 31% for the larger ones. So if you're small, you're working even harder, having more trouble. And there's some data in here I won't go into about how the whole remote work and work from home phenomenon is actually only making things worse as far as that goes. There is some data in here. You know, it takes more work and in a lot of cases more tools to keep customers safe. Given some of what we just talked about there, the cost of securing customers, according to MSPs in the survey, is up on average 19% over the course of the last 2 years. Now, nearly everybody in the survey, I think all but 1 or 2% of the surveyed MSPs say that they have successfully passed those costs along to their customers. But 71% of them struggled to at least some degree. It was not easy to pass those costs along. Demonstrating value, getting customers bought in is a difficult thing to do. So, you know, harder to secure customers, you're spending more to do it. They are resisting some of that spending. Margins are going to get hit. And without getting into the specifics, there's all sorts of interesting evidence to back up the fact that margins on security and BDR services are declining right now. Now let's talk a little bit about what the MSPs are doing in response to that landscape. And this is the integration and the consolidation. What was it? 92% of the MSPs surveyed have to some degree consolidated the number of security and BDR vendors that they work with. 70% plan to do more. 26% consider themselves highly integrated as they look at their security and data protection solutions that they're using right now. 26% say they're highly integrated. 47% are working towards that goal. Another 25% have a plan in place to become highly integrated. So overwhelming majority, again, of MSPs want to be integrated as well as consolidated. And then there's more data. In addition to the data that I cited at the beginning here, there's more data in the study to show that consolidation and integration do actually pay off. So, for example, fewer security vendors demonstrably corresponds to better security results. A third of the MSPs in the study, a third of the MSPs with 1 or 2 vendors in the study have a client who suffered downtime or data loss in the last year due to malware. So if you're down to just 1 or 2 vendors, a third of those MSPs have a customer who got hit by malware. Goes all the way up to half for those with 5 or more vendors that they're working with right now. 21% of the survey respondents with 1 or 2 vendors only has a client hit by phishing, spear phishing, or a business email compromise attack in the last year. Jumps all the way up from 21% to 39% for the ones who are still working with 5 or more vendors. And there are some additional data in here showing basically that the ones with fewer vendors are less concerned about their ability to secure their customers. So I encourage people, we'll obviously have a link to the study in the show notes. I encourage people to dive into this data and information. It's interesting stuff. The big picture story is security is more necessary than ever for the end users your support. It is more difficult to deliver. It is more expensive to deliver. Getting decent margins as a result is harder than ever. And the answer that to me, surprisingly large number of MSPs, one of the answers that they're turning to address that issue is cutting down the number of vendors that they're working with and working with more integrated tools. And let me just put this out there quickly before I shut up. It's worth noting that this is exactly what Acronis does. So, I mean, there's a reason they went out and asked about consolidation and integration. They offer a sort of end-to-end security plus BDR platform, all from one supplier, all tightly integrated. They were, fingers and toes crossed that this is what the data was going to say, because this is kind of what they do.
Right. I was going to laugh because my hot take analysis is shocking. They found consolidation made money. But actually, it's important that the positive, because it's true, they're also validating their own strategy. That's why they're running the strategy they're running, is they believe that a consolidated security vendor is better. And it looks like the data is telling them they're right. But what's also interesting to me, and for me, that there's kind of a couple of headlines here from an analyst perspective. And the first one I'll start with is remember, everybody, you can't solve a people and process problem with tools. Right? Oftentimes, too many solution providers, IT services companies that I talk to think if they just get one more tool, or if they just get the perfect tool, they'll solve the problem. No, that's not how you solve the security issue for risk management for your customers. It's people and process, way more than tools, way more. And it actually, the other way of interpreting some of this data is, look, the more tools you get, the more you're just focused on tools rather than actually doing things correctly. And so for me, it was this element of it's a bit of validation of you're not throwing tools at this problem, everybody. Focus on doing the risk management side well, and you'll flourish. The other thing, and we said it on stage, Rich, and I'd love to hear your take on this as well, is I sort of laugh and go I want to see nobody trust vendors. That's the direction I want this to go. And by the way, let me specify what I mean by that. I'm not saying I don't trust the sales guy I work with, or the individual relationship I have, or I don't trust their product. What I'm saying is that I should not actually trust that everything just magically gets solved or does what the tool says it was, or more importantly, that the tool also can't be used against me in the event of it getting, breached. Is that you have to take a very skeptical eye as a zero trust implementer to everything you do. And if you just have a blind spot and blindly trust some tool, even if it is your security tool, that will be an attack vector. We'll bring this up again later, but but that was the other big headline here. Is I sort of look and say, in a way, that kind of 47% of solution providers that don't trust their own services, I actually want that to be a level of, I want them to say 100% don't trust their services, but I want them to say that for the right reasons.
Yeah, no, and it's such an interesting point, and I can tell you, as you know, from my behind the scenes sort of vantage point, working with the Acronis folks, from their perspective, they looked at those numbers. 53% don't completely trust vendors, 49% don't completely. Those felt like very small percentages to them, and yeah, you pointed out it really ought to be zero, and for the right reason, but in the critical concept in security right now. We have a session we've been doing at our events all year long dedicated to this, is zero trust security. And really your mindset should be, I don't trust anything. I don't trust the vendors, tools, myself, the business, but I'm going to assume it is all dangerous until I have, satisfied myself that this time for this minute, it's not. And so, yeah, if anything, we need to get those trust numbers down.
Right. Also, never trust anybody with two first names either, ever.
100% agree. You're so right. It's an instant red flag. But that's actually like, it's funny, and it's funny because in a way it's true. It's like you need to learn that. You need to stop implicitly trusting things. I mean, it was reminded of it literally this week when I was spearphished. Like, Rich, we were talking about, I am the president of my homeowners association. Somebody scraped my data, wrote a very targeted email, and I was spearphished. And you know what? I almost fell for it, because it was so good. And it's like, wait a second, Dave, you always have to remember, you cannot trust anything that you are being told. And that applies at the individual level, but it has to apply at the organization and particularly for IT services companies. I know it's hard. I'm not saying this is this is not going to be continual effort. But last I checked, hard things make me money. So, so I like taking on hard problems for exactly that reason.
And I'll reinforce the other thing that you said there too, partly because there's a sort of mea culpa element to this, which is, the importance of people and process versus tools. So a part of what I do is write about the news, and a lot of news is tool makers rolling out tools. And so a lot of the news people read, not just from ChannelPro, but everywhere, every other publication out there is about tools. And I do think it creates over time this kind of mindset that what matters in security first and foremost is the tools. And you can't secure customers without tools. Tools are important. A function that we in the media perform is helping people understand what's out there and what works and what doesn't and so on. But it is good to remind people over and over again that tools are one part of the equation, and arguably significantly less important than the processes, the policies, the training and awareness of the end users, the people. That is really what you absolutely have to get right first and foremost.
I'd be remiss if I didn't quip that Matt said these two podcasts go together. Yeah, that's why I spend so much time talking about people and process and organizational culture and implementation styles when I think about this stuff, because it's like, these are great tools. I actually do believe at some level a lot of these vendors are going to create good tools, but I know that's just such a small portion of actually the delivery of IT services. I always fall back on this element of, like, every IT service provider, go look at your expense line item. You know what the biggest expense line item? People and payroll. You should be spending a proportionate amount of time on your people and payroll more than your tools. Not to say they're not all important, but think about the way you leverage your expenses to solve your customers' problems. That's why I spend as much time as I do there.
Well, to look at two carpenters, you got a good carpenter and a bad carpenter. You give them both a good hammer, and one of them's going to build a nice house, the other one's not. So
exactly.
Important stuff. So this is a great article to go read. Rich, I might have set the record for the number of times the % sign is used in an article. So folks, if you like the % sign, check out this article. It's used over and over and over again. Lots of good data, lots of good statistics. Go and check it out. There's just so much to dive in here that we could spend all day on this. And I want to move on to our next story. So Rich, this was good stuff, but Acronis has more. You were there. What's now and what's next?
So let's talk a little bit about news from the show. And there wasn't a ton of big news, but I did get an opportunity to follow up on some of the things that they spoke about from the main stage during the general session. I'll run through some of that very quickly and then talk about the one thing that they talked about. And they didn't make a big deal of this. They did talk about it, but they didn't kind of flag it to some, arguably as much as they should have, because I think it's the single most strategic thing that they talked about at the show. But, one of the other things that they talked about is this is an SMB first cyber protection company. It has been, that this will remain the case in the future. They get about 25% of their revenue today from larger businesses, from enterprises, because some of their SMB partners also have enterprise customers. They are going to be looking to go deeper to get a little more serious about that enterprise space. And so when the guy from ChannelPro hears that, he immediately starts thinking, well, are you going to become an enterprise vendor? Are are your SMB partners going to get left behind? Are you going to go direct? No. So, I mean, basically, they're going to be 100% channel to the enterprise, to SMB. They don't expect all of their SMB partners to be interested in selling to the enterprise. They're thinking maybe 10, 20% will kind of follow them along, but that's fine. That's a new opportunity for those companies. And they are going to be, they are very insistent that they are really not going to neglect or move away from their SMB partners. And in fact, Patrick Pulvermuller, who is their new CEO, he stepped into office, into that position in July. He said, look, 25% of our revenue is enterprise today. 5 years from now, it'll probably be 30%. And it'll be 30% of a bigger pie. It'll be actually quite a big number, but we're still going to be 70% SMB. And anything we do in the enterprise is still going to be channel only. So this is not one of those, we're making a play for the enterprise announcements that SMB partners, I think, need to be too worried about. Acronis was on ChannelPro's All-Stars list, Matt, for 2021. And what got them there was that earlier this year, they introduced this new kind of unusual, very interesting pricing scheme where basically they took a whole bunch of separate products, backup and security and a bunch of other things. They took them all and rolled them up into one product called CyberProtect Cloud. And you can get a basic edition of CyberProtect Cloud with reasonably robust functionality, I should say, for nothing. It's free. You pay a little bit for storage. I think if you exceed a certain number and there's like some e-signature functionality in there, you've got to buy separately. But for the most part, that edition, that starter edition of CyberProtect Cloud is free. But then they have this series of what they call advanced service packs or advanced packs that are that you do pay for, and they're sort of add-ons with the more sophisticated functionality that the customers really kind of need. And the idea basically is there is this way to kind of get in and experiment with the system, and then there's this very flexible kind of mix and match way to tailor what you do on top of the base functionality to the customers. And I think there are 6 advanced packs now. There are more coming. They anticipate that at some point not too far from now, there will be actually like 50 different combinations of these packs that theoretically you could put together. So it's a very flexible model for supporting your customers. It is also, from the standpoint of their sales organization, a structure that encourages upselling and cross-selling, because Acronis has about 25,000 partners right now. About 15,000 of them are active partners from their standpoint. The others aren't maybe transacting a lot of business with them. But even a lot of those 15,000 active partners are, like just doing backup, essentially. They're doing something kind of plain vanilla, somewhat commoditized. And if Acronis can make it easy for them, encourage them to start layering other services that they provide on top of that, that's going to be good for them. And they're hoping it's good for the partners too. Quick thing to say about that is just, and this is what you would kind of expect. I think we're just over 6 months since the rollout of that new scheme. It sounds like there's definitely still some work being done to kind of help the partners understand what this is and how to take advantage of it and so on. Nothing they didn't anticipate. There was a lot of outreach before it rolled out. I suspect there's still a lot of outreach going on right now, but the usual sort of, get up and running kind of issues I think are happening right now, but they are still very, very confident that they made the right choice there. And so last but not least, and this is what I was alluding to before, this is the really interesting strategic thing that they talked about at the show and maybe, didn't even talk about enough. At some point in the next few days, they said it starts here in the US in October, and October is just about over as we record this. So very, very soon, they are going to start constructing something that they call the Acronis Cyber Network. So today, Acronis has 38 data centers around the world. 14 of those they opened up in the last 12 months. 38, it's a pretty good number. When the cyber network is fully in place, they are going to have hundreds of computing facilities around the world. And there are a number of reasons for this. If you can reduce the distance between a data center and the endpoint that data center is protecting, less latency, more performance. If you've got hundreds of data centers out there, you've also got enormous redundancy, and that benefits reliability. Here's the big thing that I think they're thinking about, and they talked on their product roadmap and elsewhere about the importance of artificial intelligence these days in securing customers. But there's sort of a time limit that you're dealing with for the endpoint to communicate something new that's happening to the cloud, and the cloud to evaluate it and to send back instructions. Yes, this is dangerous. No, it isn't. And Acronis thinks that time, they think the round trip transit time for the communication between the endpoint and the cloud can't exceed 20 milliseconds. So how do you keep that transit time to within 20 milliseconds? Well, this is going to vary geographically, right? If the cloud and the endpoint are communicating on a copper network, they're going to need to be pretty close to one another. If they have access to, latest generation fiber, they can be somewhat further apart. But on average, Acronis says they need endpoints to be within 250 miles of an Acronis computing facility in order to get that response time to 20 milliseconds or less. And as Patrick Pulvermuller, their new CEO, said, he kind of painted this picture. Like, think of a map of the world in your mind, and then imagine you're holding a round stamp on it, and in scale, the size of that stamp is a 500-mile diameter. And now start stamping circles on the map. You're going to have hundreds of circles on that map before you've covered all the populated spaces on Earth. And that's what they're building. It starts here in the US this month or within the next few days. It's a multi-year project, but they are going to cover the globe with enough data centers to be within 20 milliseconds, 250 miles of every endpoint that they support.
And if anybody wonders about if that strategy works or not, this is the Netflix strategy. This is what Netflix did for content distribution by putting their nodes across the network so that there's always a fast response time. And additionally, they layered on top AI to make sure that their end customers were responded with relevant content to them at exactly the right time. So if you wonder if this strategy is one that might work, I don't know, there's this company called Netflix that did a really great job running this exact same play. Applying it to security is really intriguing if I'm sort of looking at it from that strategy and say, yeah, that makes sense to me, because you want communication to the edge really fast. You want really good security smarts to all of this. I'm intrigued. I'll definitely, I am definitely the show me the money guy on saying, sure, I got to see it to believe it. But if you ask me, do I like that strategy? I like Netflix, so this seems to work for me. The other thing that you threw in there, Rich, that I want to make sure I highlight as well is I am not a channel purist on a company. I don't look and say a company must be 100% channel for me to get to think they're running a good play, because smart ones are actually diversified. They've got a way of doing some direct business because, I don't know, that's the reality of the world we live in, right? What I actually look for is I look to say, do they have the understandings? Are they running a solid channel playbook? Is that a significant portion of their revenue? Because, by the way, we know from Jay McBain at Forrester, if we hear all of his quotes on the way you make money, if you look at Salesforce, it's $5 for every $1 of Salesforce revenue. If we look at Microsoft, it's like $8 for every $1 of Microsoft revenue. If we look at Google, I think they're quoting, I want to say they're quoting $11 for every one, but I need to check that one. It's the services upside for implementation is always dramatically higher, and I'm want to see that ratio. So I look at somebody who's put together a solid channel program and go, okay, that means I can build a play that looks around high services revenue compared with those unit prices. So if they're checking the check boxes, I'm less worried about a pure play channel program player versus one that lets me do that services play.
Dave, you mentioned Netflix, which is an interesting comparison and I didn't think about that when I was looking at this. I was thinking Amazon, more or less, right? It's like, well, how do we expand and get more people to buy stuff through Amazon? How do we make that better? How do we give everybody one-day delivery? We're going to build a crap load of distribution centers all over the place. So that way we can go give one day delivery to everybody, right? But there's a cost to that. There seems like there's significant risk to this, building out a network of this scale in real world data centers, because that's a lot of overhead, no?
Maybe. Computing power is a lot easier to get out into the field than it ever was before. And I mean, that is theoretically what larger companies are the ability to do, and why you want them scaling up, right? If they're able to scale up with that capability, and all signs point to they have that capability, that's where it goes. Now, proof is in the execution, of course, but we're laying out if that's what they're saying they're doing, I'm paralleling to the why I think that strategy would work. Yeah, they got to go out and prove it, right? Let's watch them do it. But at least we're analyzing, okay, that's the playbook they're saying they're running and why they're running it. Yeah, okay, I nod to that. That makes some sense to me. Let's see it work, because it's the two parts to that, right? You've got to they are focused on keeping that latency down to then apply the machine learning and the AI in a proper turnaround. I'm certainly intrigued.
Now, is anybody else doing anything like this, or are they kind of, blazing new ground here?
It sounds new to me. Like from when I've looked at no one has. Certainly, I hear lots of these pitches and I hear lots of people talking about it, and I haven't seen somebody else describe it that way. Rich, you look at the market the way I do?
I mean, I think everyone who's serious in security is serious about AI. I can't think of another vendor who sees a big future in AI who's thinking about that in terms of the physical proximity of the cloud and the endpoint. They might be out there, but it's that piece of it is new to me.
And thus your ears always perk up when it's like, okay, now there's an idea that is different, and if and now they're clearly confident enough to actually now tell us about it, right? That it's happening versus it's on some roadmap. I think that's worth distinctly watching to see how that evolves.
Yeah, we will keep an eye on that as they build that out and get scale, and we'll see if it works, if it pays off for them. We'll just have to see over the next coming months and year. We're gonna so folks, there's a lot more in these stories than we're kind of touching on here. There's a lot of other Acronis news in there that Rich kind of touched on. Folks, find the show sheet for episode 1 or episode 204 on your phone. You can open it up. Usually the links are in there. If you're on an iPhone, go to channelpronetwork.com, find the show sheet for 204. All the links will be there. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the like button, subscribe, and open up the show description area. All of the links to these stories are in there, so you can go and read along and kind of get the rest of the story, if you will. Rich, we got another interesting one that I've been looking forward to getting to. This is 4 thoughts on the future of technology and security. Interesting stuff from, I'm not going to try to pronounce the name, Rich. You did this to set me up, and I know that was your goal, so I would totally butcher this. So I'm going to let you do it.
Deftly played.
Yeah. And I'm going to butcher it too, by the way. I'm reasonably confident about the first name, and I'm probably going to get the last name wrong. But these are 4 thoughts on the future of technology and security from Sergey Belousov. He is the founder of Acronis. He was until July the CEO. They named a new CEO then, and Sergey became the chief research officer. I'll just go out and kind of say this, in my job, I get to interview smart people all the time, all week long, truly, the people who are smart enough to run very successful technology companies. Probably the only interview I do in a typical year that intimidates me a little bit is Sergey, because he's not just smart. His name is on literally hundreds of patents, dozens of scholarly articles. He has thoughts and super intelligent thoughts about a range of topics you wouldn't believe. I was fortunate enough to get 20 minutes with him while I was at the Acronis show. And I say fortunate because one of the things, and he has a very dry sense of humor, by the way. And so he says these things sometimes you don't even know that he's kind of joking, but this was for real. He said, hey, I'm the chief research officer at Acronis now. I have all sorts of other things that I want to do, other ventures and projects and ideas I want to pursue now that I'm not running the business day to day as CEO, but I'm still going to be full-time at Acronis. It's just that I have a 90-hour work week, and I'm going to spend about 40 hours of it on Acronis. That qualifies as a full-time commitment. So to get 20 minutes with the guy felt like a pretty good thing, basically. And then I just started asking him about some of the things. He spent a little time on stage at the show just talking about the future and some things that he predicts. And I kind of asked him a little bit to elaborate and talk maybe about the security implications. Edge computing was one of the things that he talked about. And I built this story around quotes from either the interview I did with him or from his keynote. And he was kind of talking about how, the thing with edge computing is latency is the problem. In order to really take advantage of the processing power at the edge and keep it in touch with the cloud, you've got to minimize latency. And he said, latency isn't going to get better. The speed of light is fixed. There's only so much you can do to address that latency issue. But the thing that I spoke about with him a little bit was just the security issues with edge computing, which are enormous. Because as he said, locking down one facility, one building is hard enough. If you've got a whole bunch of them, if you've got devices and people all over the place, keeping all of those parts just in view, and let alone keeping them all secure, is very, very difficult. And a lot of that doesn't come down to protecting the data and the endpoints. A lot of it is physical security. And Acronis, interestingly enough, is thinking about physical security, people security, like access controls and stuff like that, as something that it will be pursuing in the future, because that's very closely tied to edge computing from their point of view. This was another thing he said during his keynote. It's just a matter of time before people will actually stop knowing how to produce non-smart devices. So a lot of the devices in our lives now are, IP enabled, and they're exchanging information with the cloud or with each other. Before too long, pretty much everything that we work with is going to be like that. And that too has enormous security implications. And he kept kind of coming back to vacuum cleaners. That vacuum cleaner that's keeping your home clean is also, as it does so, drawing up essentially a map of your home. A lot of these things have cameras. It's it's shooting video of your home, and he was. I don't want people to take him too literally about this, because he laughed when he said it, but he said, most of these vacuum cleaners are made in China. There's this invasion of Chinese vacuum cleaners happening in this country right now. And, do we trust those companies? Are we comfortable sharing all that information with manufacturers in China? Is anyone even asking about that? And this was a point he came back to numerous times. The strategy for dealing with a lot of these security challenges is just not to think about it. And that's, an example of that. This was a good quote too. He said, "Get ready for 100-year-old IT people." Because he said at one point that aging is the worst disease on earth. And as machines get more intelligent, as we get more artificial intelligence, drug discovery is going to get much faster, much more effective. Healthcare treatments are going to get much faster, much more effective. Lifespans are going to increase. I think he said in the next 25 to 50 years, people will be living to hundreds of years. And what that means, of course, is you're going to be out there, folks, recruiting 100-year-old IT people, and they will be relatively young and up to date on things. And this is good, because another thing that he talked about was the fight for talent, as he put it. And he's borrowing here. Sergey's the kind of guy who kind of hangs out with Nobel laureates. And he has a Nobel laureate friend who kind of said, for 10,000 years, humans fought over resources, land, minerals, wealth. For the last 100 years, we've been fighting over technology. The next fight is about talent, and we don't have nearly enough of it, even just to kind of make all of the possibility of IT possible, to secure all of that huge gap right there. And then maybe further to that point, there was a point, and again, he was kind of chuckling when he said this. I don't want to get him in trouble with the cryptocurrency enthusiasts out there, but he said, if you've got Bitcoin, just sell it. Because quantum computing, which is still kind of out there as a concept right now, this will not be true for long. And when that happens, there will be machines, probably, not certainly, but probably capable of decrypting blockchains. Basically, as he put it, Bitcoin is actually going to be decrypted and irrelevant. And it won't even just be Bitcoin. Anything encrypted, basically. He said, if there's anything you say today that you don't want anyone to be able to read ever, don't trust that public key encryption is actually going to keep that private forever, because once quantum computing has gotten towards the mainstream, it will be vulnerable to decryption. So this is the kind of stuff, if you geek out on this kind of stuff, this is the kind of stuff you get to talk about with Sergey when you spend 20 minutes with him. And as a treat to myself, no kidding, on the flight home yesterday from Miami, I wrote some of this stuff up.
So this is your like weekend long read. Like this is the stuff you kick back and ponder the end of the earth kind of stuff. Like it's fascinating to me that a lot of the big brains are all thinking about aging this way. You see a lot of the Silicon Valley guys are spending a lot of time thinking about the end of times and aging. Like that's a theme I keep hearing from some of those big thinkers in this. He's not wrong on all of these things, from somebody. It's a matter of time. I think there might be a debatable amount of time for these things to come. And also, sometimes, and I'm guilty of this myself, futurist analysts like to think things will happen more dramatically than they do. Smart devices might just literally mean they are self-sensing at some basic level versus full-on autonomous smart robot type versions that we think. It may be much more subdued than that. RFID enabled, a location aware, or some basic, but that qualifies them for smart. So, it is important to have a little bit of the downside thinking on this to say, like, well, it's the slower bit. But I'm with you, Rich. This is the kind of stuff where you're like, this is just fascinating to sit and listen to.
And you mentioned that if you sort of start thinking about some of this stuff, you can actually kind of get yourself a little bit scared. I didn't even get into his take on machine intelligence, which I think scares him a little bit, because as he put it, we're building these machines that are smarter and more powerful, but they're not nearly as sort of street smart and intuitive. They're not as smart as humans are, basically, but they're getting more and more powerful. And so he said it's sort of like inventing a 10-year-old with all unlimited power. And they're going to interpret things wrong, and maybe people are going to get very, he said it's kind of a minor miracle we haven't had a nuclear war already because the machines misinterpreted information.
Right.
It gets harder, it gets more worrying, basically, that kind of thing can happen down the road when a program, a machine with the ability to do something that destructive, but with the wisdom and intelligence of a 10-year-old is out there.
Yeah, it's just these are your moments to sit back and like just ponder the big direction. And by the way, technologists should be doing this, right? You should be spending some time thinking about stuff more than 6 months, 12 months out. You need to be thinking about where this might be going to try and identify some larger trends.
The smart device discussion is interesting. I don't want to spend too long on it, but I do think that there needs to be some responsibility when building smart devices. There are just too many devices already that collect and harvest information, some private, and just these companies that build them, they let it communicate all back to these data centers and they store it. Why not every device has to submit information back and be stored forever? And we're seeing that in just tons of different stuff and services. Big problems in privacy, in my opinion, as opposed necessarily to security. But I know those two things go hand in hand.
So it's funny you bring it up, Matt, because I think there's a big opportunity for IT services companies to work with customers to actually audit and understand the information they collect and answer the question why, and be very critical of making sure only the information that's needed, that have an actual justification, and you've applied like an ethics and downside lens to what can happen to that data. I think there's actually a whole set of businesses in that. And I think that, it's I'm not saying, again, I like hard problems because I think they make money. I'm not saying this is like everyone's going to instantly spin this business up. What I'm saying is I think there is real opportunity because it's hard. Like sitting down and working with your customers, but the ones that value that style of service will pay for it, right? Because you are minimizing their risk, minimizing their exposure, minimizing the possibility of things being extorted, right? Like if you think of the downside of ransomware, which we always talk about, it's the what if that data gets out? Well, what if you've really given some thought to, are we really collecting everything we need? We are actually reducing our risk by not collecting as much and being very deliberate about this. I think there's a whole practice area here.
I mean, absolutely. And I couldn't even count the number of times I've spoken either to data scientists or to security experts who have sort of said data, like anything else in IT, has a life cycle. And part of that life cycle is death, meaning if you don't need it anymore, get rid of it. Because
get rid of it.
Sitting around, it's all it is something that can be stolen.
And how many people are really looking at the removal of data from businesses? It's fractional. And immediately I go, there's opportunity there. When people aren't doing something, that's where we want to go.
Yeah. So I want to point out the last one too, because I thought this one has some far-reaching and huge consequences if it ever comes to fruition. But that is the introduction of quantum computers that, as they say in here, have the ability to basically say you can no longer trust encryption, which is what everybody, like the whole model right now is that security is possible because encryption works. What happens when it doesn't, Dave?
Well, okay, but this is where, and I'm just going to just poke at this idea because everyone immediately goes, oh my God, encryption's going to fail. Yeah, when we have quantum computers, we're going to make a new version that'll be able to do much bigger math. Like and maybe I'm oversimplifying, but I keep looking at from the fact of saying, like, we kind of know some of the pieces of that. We can apply this technology in new ways. And again, I don't claim to be any kind of encryption expert, but I'm looking and saying, like, I have some level of understanding of the basic problem is you can make it bigger. And if you have bigger, more powerful computers, you should be able to respond to this, right?
I will say this came up during the interview because he said that the answer that he typically gets when this comes up is, well, we'll just make the encryption key bigger. And for him, this doesn't make a lot of sense. It's like, okay, bad guys, I used to lock my front door. Bad guys figured out how to get past the lock. So I'm going to put more doors up. And it's like, if they know how to get past the first one, they're just going to keep getting past them. It's like, once people have figured out how to compromise that technology, it's of limited usefulness. I don't know. I mean, I don't recall him kind of telling me, well, here's what we do instead of encryption. But he's very skeptical about encryption as a long-term answer.
Well, and I buy into all of that. What I'm also just observing is that we would, in this realm of having quantum computing, which, by the way, isn't assured. Let's just observe it isn't assured it actually will happen. You also have the ability to implement new things using that technology. It feels intuitive to me to say, whatever the next, we call it encryption 2.0 or whatever another thing of that is. I'm not necessarily saying you make the number bigger. I'm saying you'll come up with something that addresses the need for privacy using that new technology.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a really good point. I remember I had a conversation with an Acronis competitor. Actually, it was Sophos a few years ago, and I was talking to their now chief product officer, and he was kind of pointing out, artificial intelligence. And this is a few years ago. The whole industry has made a lot of progress then, but at that point, it was still like we're just beginning to utilize AI in security, and it's really going to level the playing field with the bad guys. And I remember thinking to myself, well, that's encouraging. I like that. That's good news. But then at the end of the conversation, he said, now, on the other hand, at some point, down the road, the bad guys are going to have AI too, and we'll kind of lose that edge. It works exactly the same, in reverse, if you will, with quantum computing. It's going to be very empowering for attackers, but in theory, it ought to be very empowering for the people who are defending against the attackers too. We just don't know how necessarily.
Right. And by the way, he's asked, so get back to Sergey, he's asking the right questions. Like, we need to be thinking about that as we're rolling it out, but that doesn't mean it's unsolvable. Right. And so he is completely right to observe that. And yes, it will cause this problem. But there's an implication there of like, well, it's unsolvable. Nah, I'm not sure of that yet. Like, I'm not sure it's an unsolvable problem. He's just right to say we better figure that out because the current scheme won't survive that.
Interesting. Good stuff. Yeah. Fascinating things to think about. Good questions. Things like discussions like these scare me. Like they make me not want to sleep at night. So we're just going to move right along to that story that I know, Dave, you've been dying to get to. And that's Rich of the Kaseya is investing some money in something maybe they should have invested a lot of money in earlier, but I'll let you comment on that.
And they will say that they did, by the way. So this is Kaseya. Now, last week on the show, we spoke. I was at the Kaseya Connect IT event. We talked a little bit about how they addressed, you know, the 800-pound gorilla, the giant elephant in the room, whatever you want to call it. I mean, they had that massive and massively impactful breach of VSA, their RMM system, over the summer. And Fred Vicola, the CEO of Kaseya, got up on stage during his keynote and he said, look, we screwed up. Shouldn't have happened, but it did. We can do better. We have to do better. We will do better. Now, we talked about it on the show. It was you and me. We didn't have a guest host on to kind of discuss this from an MSP point of view, or in Dave's case, an analyst point of view. About 2-3 hours after we recorded that episode, I did an interview with Fred Vicola and kind of got into that a little bit more. And so, you know, he gave me a little bit more information about specifically what they're doing to ensure that this doesn't happen again. And he didn't give me an exact number. He said, we were spending heavily on security before. We're spending, quote unquote, millions and millions more than we were now. They have hired outside penetration testers and consultants, including the Krebs Stamos group, which is one of the most respected names out there. They are in the process they have hired and are hiring internal penetration testers as well. Their thinking, and I believe this is best practice, is we're going to split all of these in-house and third-party penetration testers into small groups, not have them talk to one another and coordinate what they're doing. Just let them think independently and trust that when you've got a bunch of different smart, motivated people thinking in completely different directions, you're more likely to uncover vulnerabilities than if everybody was just taking the same approach together. They have also, and I mentioned this on the show last week, hired a new chief information security officer. He was until very recently, just a few weeks ago, a highly placed cybercrime agent at the FBI. He's part of the equation as well to really kind of double down on infrastructure security. So a little bit more of an insight into what Kaseya is doing to make sure that, or at least minimize the chances that they don't suffer this kind of breach again. But I bring it up partly because there's some new information here, but partly because we have somebody from outside ChannelPro who can now provide his perspective on what Kaseya said at the show and what they're doing in response to the VSA breach. Dave,
I gotta go get my popcorn. Hang on.
Yeah, exactly. So all right, so I'm going to make a couple of statements. Fred Vicola came out and said, made some perspective on this and said, you know, that the issue wasn't that bad. And actually, I have to say, like from a incident response perspective, Kaseya handled that the way they should. They shut down their cloud. They moved very quickly. They did minimize the damage. Like, I actually want to acknowledge that they did all that stuff right. If I gave Kaseya infinite money to address security, they cannot ensure that they will never be breached. Play that out. It does not matter how much money he throws at the problem. He cannot guarantee that the system is foolproof. Let's make that statement. I give him infinite resources. Impossible to solve that problem. Where I think this is important is for IT solution providers to understand they have put tools across their network that have absolute and total administrative control over everything in the network. And they don't monitor it, check it, enforce any rules against it, don't do any auditing. I'm going to throw back to earlier in the show. You don't trust anybody. You don't trust anybody. And you've put a tool that you've decided to just implicitly trust. You have accepted that risk. Now, you may say that that is important to the way you have chosen to run your business. And if that is your choices, go forth, make some money. But when something happens, you cannot act surprised and you have gone in with an open understanding of that. You might decide you are going to do something different with your business. You might decide if you're all cloud, maybe you're de-emphasizing endpoints. Maybe you are moving to a zero trust security model, or maybe you're looking for read-only versions of monitoring tools and you're using something else for, like, you might do multiple tools again. There is more than one way to solve this problem. Right, and what I am just telling any people that ask me on this is, don't assume there's only one way to solve this problem. Understand the changing landscapes. I'm going to point to the most recent CISA documentation on guidance for MSPs customers, and their guidance to end customers is to audit and track all MSP tools in the environment. That's the guidance from the security professionals to collectively end customers to watch these tools. So why aren't you doing it yourself? Why are you not taking a more skeptical role? As I said, I think Kaseya did what they did a admirable job of minimizing the damage. But if I give them infinite resources, that is not to say this won't happen again. Whose responsibility is that to solve? It's not Kaseya's. It actually is the risk on the IT services company that's assuming risk by using the tools.
And it's so. First of all, we should point out this is not exclusive to Kaseya, right?
I would make those exact same statements about the Big Four, their competitors. Any of these tools. That is literally the message that I'm making and why we talk about less tools, right? It is less risk because you're introducing less points attack vectors. But we don't take this approach. So, Rich, go ahead.
It's interesting to me because Kaseya did its show last week. Datto did its big show the week before that, I believe, or maybe 2 weeks ago or whatever. And those two companies in particular, just because they've recently done an event, but really anyone in the space, they're in this awkward kind of position right now where they know exactly what you just said, Dave, that they must do a lot to secure these products. They can't guarantee that they are forever going to be secure from breach, but they're also trying to sell these products. And so it's like during the Datto show, they kind of took a little time on stage to sort of say, hey, folks, I know the Kaseya tool got breached, and I'm not saying that it's unique to Kaseya, but we can speak at Datto to the security of our RMM tool, and we really believe it's a pretty secure tool. It's like, I think MSPs are kind of waking up to the fact that these tools are vulnerable, and the companies that make them are in this weird position right now where they are investing very heavily to try to make these tools more secure, but they know too exactly what they can't maybe be 100% open and explicit about it, but they know very well what you're talking about. And I tell you, I admire anyone who like Jason Moran, who just became the Chief Information Security Officer at Kaseya. You have got to be a brave person to hold that job, to take that job right now, because trouble is coming your way. You know that going in. And it's going to be painful when it happens, no matter how good you are at your job. That is a tough gig to step into. I respect anyone who has got it, because again, maybe I'm out there. You may consider that I'm crazy. I think there's that the industry has fallen into this happy place where everyone just assumes there are certain tools you must have. And I fundamentally disagree with that statement. I believe there are so many different ways to deliver IT services depending on the way you want to solve what I believe the core value of an IT services company is, and that is to help customers effectively implement technology for their business goals. That statement makes no implication of any particular tool or category as a requirement to do that. Now, you can make healthy arguments of the different versions of the business model and how you'd like to do it and how you'd like to implement it. But there is nothing to say that me and my brain couldn't go do everything, right? Literally just deliver exactly what I've said, sans tools. Now, I have downsides to that, and I may not be able to scale, and it may not achieve certain business goals.
But I think it's important for all of us to just question the fundamental of, you don't have to assume there's only one way to do this problem, particularly when it's 2021, almost 2022. The market looks a whole lot different than when this space was created. SaaS, cloud implemented services, the changes in endpoints, types of endpoints. This is a really different market. You could solve the fundamental problem in really different, interesting ways. And if IT services companies should be asking the question, how do I want to solve that problem for me at the risk level that I'm willing to do, and for the customers I want to serve and how I want to serve them?
And I will tease our audience with this because we're running a little bit long here. If we had a little bit more time, I would follow up on an idea that we discussed, an idea of yours that we talked a little bit about at the Acronis show in Miami this week, which is this thought you have that maybe part of the answer is what I think you called a read-only remote manager. There's one way to eliminate the.
Well, look, we got a little bit of time. Like, I don't know, product people that are listening to this, where's my read-only RMM? Like, where is it? If endpoints are a little less important, why wouldn't I just read-only? Have something that is literally auditable that isn't necessarily an attack vector. That's a different architecture. I'm not saying, again, anything is perfect, or just, again, I'm brainstorming. Maybe it's on the blockchain. Maybe it is auditable and inventoryable. Like, there's creative space here to be disruptive. One of my 2021 predictions was that this space is ripe for disruption. If it doesn't happen this year, it doesn't mean my prediction is wrong. I just got the time scale wrong. I still think this market has life. I love IT services companies. I think there's room for disruption here.
Interesting stuff, and we'll have to see if that prediction comes through true. But we are kind of running long. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we're going to actually we still got to get to an interview, don't we? So hint, we recorded this interview before, so I kind of screwed up there, but that's okay. We had to do it at the top of the show for timing reasons, but we got an awesome interview coming up here with Larry Walsh of Channelnomics. We're going to talk about customer experience in managed services. That sounds like it could be a fascinating discussion. So stick around. We'll be right back. And welcome back to part 2 of this episode of ChannelPro Weekly. Implementing and fixing technology is what you do, and you're probably pretty good at it. But being an integrator or a managed services provider means your customers are people and not just machines. And that means that you need to provide a great customer experience. But what exactly does that mean, and why is it so important? And here to talk about that is Larry Walsh, the CEO, Chief Analyst, and Founder at Channelnomics. Welcome, Larry.
Hey, Matt. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here. I know you speak at a lot of events, and a lot of people are familiar with you, but we got a pretty wide audience. So if you could take a couple minutes, tell us a little bit more about you and your role at Channelnomics.
Sure. So people who do know me know that this is the least favorite thing I do is talk about myself. I'm less interested in what Channelnomics is. Channelnomics supports technology vendors, distributors, and solution providers around the world in developing better routes to market. And so we're constantly looking at what's on the edge and over the horizon to figure out better ways of getting technology in the hands of the end customer, and that's where all the money comes from.
And so how long have you been there? Is this is something that you founded? So how long has Channelnomics been around?
It's interesting you say when you found it. Yeah, I did. I just sort of was lying on the side of the road. I picked it up one day, dusted it off, and there it was. It's been, we just celebrated our 11th year. 11th year,
and you sanitized it when you picked it up, right? Ran it through the hand sanitizer.
That's what we tell people. We just claim 5-second rule.
That's awesome. So very cool. So how did you kind of come up with this idea, this concept
of Channelnomics?
Yeah.
Oh, well, okay. Truth is that I was in publishing for 20 years. I started my career 30 years ago as a newspaper reporter in Boston. Moved into magazines 20 years ago in security tech, and moved into channels shortly thereafter. And around 2010, I was a publisher and editor of a channel website and magazine, and I just decided to stop doing it. And when I looked around at where I could go get a job, my next job, I was like, I didn't see anything I liked, so I started doing this.
Interesting. Now, what magazine was it back in the day that you the channel magazine?
Yeah, so I started as the editor of VAR Business, once upon a time, the defunct sister of CRN. And then I was the editor and publisher of Channel Insider, which was a Ziff Davis publication.
Very cool. Hey, now, Rich, you are a editor of a channel magazine. Do you know these? Do you read these in the past?
Oh, well, especially VAR Business. So, before I was a journalist, I worked in marketing and I was at Microsoft. And, so VAR Business was like essential reading, basically at the time. So, yeah, and Channel Insiders, that's still out there, isn't it, Larry?
It is. I think so. In fact, one of my people was just told me they were quoted in it. And, so I was like, yeah, it's still out there. It's owned by Quinn Street, I believe, or whatever the prodigy of Quinn Street is.
A little known fact, Larry was my editor. I wrote columns for him in both publications.
Yes, he did. Yeah.
So this is all interconnected world.
Yeah. In fact, Channelnomics started off as a media site. So there was, there was two different entities. There was Channelnomics, which was a media site, and then there was the 2112 Group, which was the consulting side of the business. And just last year, we morphed. We shut down the media business, and we shut down Channel 2112 as a brand, and just consolidated under Channelnomics.
The reason and we mentioned this before to the audience earlier in the show, the reason I invited you to come on the show this week, the reason I invited Dave to come on the show this week is we were all very, very recently together in Miami at the Acronis show, and I had a chance to attend the presentation that you gave there. And I really kind of want to dive into some of the issues that you raised during that presentation. Which have to, they revolve around this concept of customer experience. And we'll kind of get there maybe in just a moment. But I'm going to start out, there were all sorts of wonderful statistics. I'm just a hopeless statistics geek. And you had all sorts of great stats in the presentation there. And I'm going to start out with this one. And the context for this, you said, is, the SaaS vendors, they're doing great. They're having no problems. They're landing new subscribers. They're renewing the existing ones. Their partners, the resellers, the cloud solution providers are having a harder time. And you said for every 3 new customers that a cloud reseller signs up, 2 of them end up leaving for another partner. They don't renew with the original partner of record. So what, and this is going to get us, I guess, straight to customer experience, but what's driving that? What's responsible for that low number?
There's a few different factors. Sometimes it's a matter of price, that they perceive that they're paying more than they should. Other times it's a matter of just poor engagement. And I think this is a byproduct of this entire sense of automation. That if we are going to be delivering services, whether it's a managed service or a cloud service, is that we sell it, we deliver it, everything is through some level of automation or some level of scripting, and therefore everything should just go smoothly. And we forget that we actually have to engage and talk with customers more so than what we used to prescribe was to come out and provide a report and show them all the things we did. And, that's just not going to be, that's just not the way it's going to, that's not going to cut it any longer. Really what the customers are looking for and what the customers tell us is they're looking for someone who can come and help them get the most out of technology, not just keep the technology on. And if you're not out there touching the customer repeatedly, helping them maximize value, helping them understand how to get, I hate using this word, but make them delighted that they made the purchase, that they're working with you, then they're going to find somebody else who will.
I mean, one of the points you made is that, the cloud vendors are pushing their partners to land new customers, make deals, make sales. And the partners are doing that. They're incentivized to do it. So they're going out and they're focusing very heavily on customer acquisition. And you said, some of these disturbing statistics that you highlighted on stage reflect the fact that partners are too focused on customer acquisition, insufficiently focused on customer retention, meaning they're great right up to the point the contract gets sold, but then they kind of disappear.
Well, that's the traditional sales funnel. So the way, and this is always the way vendors work. Vendors just want to get the sale. And then why shouldn't they? That's their job. They're the manufacturers or the publishers of applications, the service providers. That's what their model is built on. I think that this is where, because as more of these technologies are being delivered as a service, and they will be delivered as a service going forward, that no longer can look at the point of transaction as the end of the journey or as a pause in the journey. And that's where a lot of this comes from now, is that you get to the transaction. And as I think, Rich, you may recall, I flashed a slide of what that progression to the customer journey is. You get to that point of transaction. Afterwards, there's one step left. There's 5 or 6 that lead up to it, but then there's that one step and it just says loyalty. And it's assumed. And in fact, Dave and I used to talk about this back in the day about managed services. The presumption is that renewals are automatic. Once they're in, and they're just going to happen. And unfortunately, I will say this, the vendors actually think that way too. But the problem is that with cloud services, particularly with the dependency on business applications that many of the services are being delivered, is that the business is much like they used to do with infrastructure. They're not just going to rip and replace. So if you take and this is a crude example of it, but if you are a Salesforce user, you're not going to rip and replace Salesforce. You're going to find somebody who's going to help you use Salesforce better, right? So the vendors are far more insulated from this than the partners are. And that's why the partners need to be in there with their customers, ensuring that they are engaged, ensuring that the customers are getting most out of the technology, if not the relationship. And that will lead them to not only renew on those particular services, but then look to them for more services.
So this gets us right to customer experience, and there was a statistic in your presentation. So we're talking about customer experience like it's this important new concept for MSPs to understand, and it is. And yet, as you said in the presentation, 95% of the channel believes that customer experience is an important factor in renewals. Yep. So everybody already agrees with that. But I'm going to guess they don't define customer experience the way you do. They probably, and I'll give you a chance to tell me if I'm wrong, they probably think I answer the phone promptly. My people are, effective and courteous, and we deliver nice service, and that's a great customer experience. How does the channel tend to define, this 95% of the channel? How do they define customer experience? How do you define it?
Well, I think that's a moving target. Because you're right, let's take I'll make up a vendor name just as an example. We'll call them Microsoft. And I actually said this during the presentation. It kind of infuriates me to think that somebody at Microsoft thinks that because they're pushing these messages through 365, telling me about what changes that they've made or what updates have come through overnight, that is engagement. And that's not engagement. And the market is evolving to understand that we have to actually be almost desk side with the customer to nurture them through not only the acquisition process and deployment, but also go through and do the periodic updates to walk them through new capabilities, to show them how others are using and maximizing features and functionality. There's a number of companies out there, particularly SaaS companies, that are going through this reimagining where they actually have 90-day onboarding processes for customers, so that the customer doesn't just get left behind and left to their own devices. And there's an entire new crop of professional services organizations out there that are really beginning to make their presence known, that their sole purpose in life is just to help customers get more out of what they're using, more so than just trying to get them a product in their hands.
And Larry, this stuff is so, because I'm going to jump in, because this stuff is so interesting, because if you got to get this right in order to move on to what we're talking about in the next version, which is total experience, right? Where you get, not just the customers, but you're actually also getting your employees as part of that loop and ensuring their satisfaction, because if they're not engaged in the process and all of the stakeholders in the process, you're not doing a good job on retention. Anybody who studies SaaS knows that churn is a number, and it isn't 100% implied, and part of the solution to that is employees. Are you spending a lot of time with channel partners right now on the employee side of that?
Well, when we talk about customer experience, it is about that. There is the entire idea of there being an IT stakeholder or decision maker is kind of antiquated. Most organizations do cross-functional decision making when it comes to purchasing. So it's not as if there's one person you have to influence. Even in small businesses, it goes across the board. And the user experience down, and again, think about this going down to the desk level, has a tremendous amount of influence over what gets purchased or what is considered. So it is the totality of the organization by definition.
Well, but I'm actually asking about the internal employees at the IT provider. When you think total experience, when I say total experience, it's not as focusing on the customer, it's focusing on all the stakeholders, of which the employees at the IT service firm is also one.
Yeah, well, I would hope so, but I think the evidence is against that. I think that the channel as a community needs to do a much better job of consolidating around value propositions and then aligning their organizations towards a single, towards that unified direction. And we can see that that's not happening today. The number of, I think, during the presentation, I cited a couple of examples of this, but, the number of companies, in the channel, and it's irrespective of size. It's amazing how even some large organizations fall into this. They're not doing annual business planning. They don't have true defined organizational structures. They are based large, many of them are too many of them are based around tasks and not around value. And Rich, when you talk about chasing sales, you asked about chasing sales. Yeah, I suppose they do chase sales, but it's not an aggressive sales chase. 80% of the channel tell us that they do not set sales goals for their cloud products. And somewhere around 60% don't have a sales goal. It varies between 55 and 60%. We do this research a couple of times a year, but it's usually in that range. 55, 60% don't have a general sales goal or sales plan. And so when you're looking at that 2 to 3, what we were referencing for every 3 new accounts, they lose 2. Well, that's a lot. It's not just churn. That's an effort that's going in. Is you're assuming that that's how you're built, that there's a continual stream of business coming in that way. It doesn't really work that way in the field. And so they are extending a lot of energy for a little return.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about this during your presentation, and it's kind of crazy when you think about it, that 80% of partners are going into the year knowing what they will spend, but not what they're going to make. They've got a target for what they will spend, or at least a budget for what they're going to spend, but they don't have a budget for what they're going to bring in. They're just kind of, winging it, or as you say, taking it on faith that as long as we keep working hard, it's all going to work out.
Well, when it comes to cloud services, the average level of reinvestment is 11 to 15% of gross revenue. And so that sounds like a lot, but you start doing back in the napkin on that, the average size of particularly when you start talking about mid-tier and smaller solution providers, whether they're MSPs or VARs, you're somewhere talking beneath $3.5 million in top line revenue. So you're saying 10% of that, well, okay, that's $350,000. It sounds like a lot of money, but that covers a couple of head. It doesn't cover the real investment that needs to go into it. And best practices is that if you really want to make a go at building a real business practice, a sustainable business practice, you need to be above 20% gross or 50% net. So the numbers are against, and a lot of the times when I say the numbers are against what the partners, and I say that and I'm empathetic because, these are, we go and we talk with companies talk with partners all the time. Great people, really, they do really interesting work. They have some really interesting capabilities. And so it's really difficult to then sit down and say to them, well, okay, you made some money, you're doing well, you're not, the lights aren't going to go off suddenly anywhere, but you're not exactly winning. It really is a counterintuitive message to be listening to if you're on the other side of this conversation.
So the mistake that gets made a lot of the time is that the life cycle more or less ends at the sale. After the sale, there's this one phase in the life cycle called loyalty. So So what should, let's maybe get a little bit more specific. I mean, what should people in the audience be thinking of as the proper phases that come after the sale, and what sort of specific things should, as just a general rule, should they really be doing with every new customer they add?
I think the essential ingredient that's missing in many organizations, many solution provider organizations today, is customer success. We think about that as the post-sale technical enablement. So you get the product in their hands, you get them set up, they're provisioned, they may have some additional tweaking here and there, but the reality is that that's not enough for customer success. This needs to be programmatically instilled within the culture, within the organization, to have periodic check-ins with the customers, ask them about their use cases, ask them about their utilization, keeping records of their support requests and analyzing them, not only to understand what went wrong for post-mortem, but to anticipate. The customer is really looking now for expertise, or people with expertise to be able to tell them what they should be doing better. What could they be doing differently? What can they do to get a net increase in the value? I mean, and this is one of the things, and Dave's heard me talk about this for a long time, is that as an industry, we have traditionally talked about the value of IT in terms of some form of cost savings. So, and when you hear ROI, you typically go to, you give me $1, I'm going to save you X dollars, because there's some reduction in expense. So ROI is a reductive argument. The reality is that the customer is not looking for reduction. The customer is looking for expansion. The customer wants to get more. And so if you can go in through customer success and show them how $1 spent today will return in $10 in growth, more so than $10 in cuts, or $10 in cost savings, that's when you win. And that takes a lot of effort. It takes, we've always said that the channel has been about, knowing the customer, we've hung the moniker trusted advisor around people's necks forever. But that's mostly because you did something good episodically. You sold them the right box, you sold them the right license, you turned them on to the right service, and then it goes off into the next time. Now it's more about, okay, you did this for me today, tomorrow you're going to do something else. One of the examples we used at the Acronis event was what Cisco is doing with their CX program. And they are enabling and incenting their partners to not just read the telemetry coming out of their customers to understand what is happening, but to then act on it before the customer knows there's something wrong, or to look at that utilization, look at the telemetry, and then extrapolate out new use cases and new services that could benefit them. That's the success that the customer is looking for.
Let me have you expand on that a little bit, because what it sounds like you're talking about is kind of two different things, at least in the way I'm hearing it. One, we're talking about you just want to put a product in a customer's hands and say run. You're talking kind of about training in a sense, but you're also talking about looking at their business processes, and like, how do you do that when you don't have somebody in the business?
What, embedded with the customer?
Right.
Well, no, I mean, that's where the customer has to make that investment as well. The customer has to recognize that this is not a set and forget, that any application or any service is not going to come without some level of commitment and investment on their part. It's a misnomer to think that, again, to use something as simple as 365, something Microsoft 365, is that anybody can go, you can buy it direct. You've been able to buy it direct from the beginning. Could you actually do something with it on your own? Maybe. Are you going to get the most value out of it on your own? No. So you get somebody to help you with that instance, to be able to curate it to a state that is tailored for your business, where you get the most value out of it. Then what happens? You leave it alone? No, you actually need somebody there caring and feeding for it on a daily basis. And so the customer has to make this investment as well. I'll give you, I can't go into too many details. We're working with a company now, an interesting SaaS collaboration company. They have a deceptively marvelous application. When I first looked at it, I'm like going, well, this is kind of simple. What's, why would anybody need any help with this? Start tearing into it. Then I'm saying an application is literally saved some companies billions of dollars in development, in product development, in team collaboration costs. You start digging into it. It takes a lot of understanding about processes and about strategies and about these collaboration methodologies in order to make an application like that work. So you need people on the ground that will be able to facilitate that. And where's the starting point for that? Somebody in between. So yes, the customer bears some responsibility in this, but they need somebody to come along and tell them that from the beginning. There isn't, very rarely, I shouldn't say there isn't, there's no absolute, but rarely is there an application that is just going to solve a problem on its own. An application is just a tool that's used by somebody.
So it sounds like when you're trying to offer this kind of level of customer experience, this is where I'm seeing how specialization and kind of more focusing on a vertical becomes a lot more important, because in order to help these customers tailor these for their businesses, you really have to have a good understanding of how their business operates. So do you agree with that? Do you think specialization, verticalization is where you kind of need to go in order to offer this level of experience?
I don't disagree. And I've been a specialization skeptic for a long time. I do see the value in specializations, that vertical knowledge does have benefits. And yes, is that if I'm in a highly complex vertical or segment, that having that level of specialization is beneficial. But I don't want to send the message that specialization is the cure for what we're talking about here, because customer experience extends to every business. And knowing your customers, or getting to know your customers at a level to where you can actually interact with them in a meaningful and material way doesn't require specialization. It just requires commitment.
Dave, Dave, you're kind of nodding your head over there, so I want to get your take on that.
Because I'm with Larry on this. Like, I like verticalization. I think there's benefits to that. It's not like the answer, the silver bullet. What I actually think, and Larry, I don't think you'll think this is controversial, is I think what actually is missing in many solution providers is they've not got people with the business skills necessary to help on the side that customers actually need. The example I always use is like, look, it's not hard to put together a Zoom meeting. What is hard to do is be a good remote manager and understand how to manage your people and use the technology effectively. That's a different set of skills oftentimes than a typical provider has had. They've been used to just getting the servers running, getting the networks running. But being a good manager in a virtual environment, that's a whole other set of skills. Now, they are great skills and they can be taught and you can make a great business in it. But oftentimes this divide is the struggle of that. I mean, Larry, are you seeing people transform like the kinds of headcount they've got in the successful solution providers?
Well, yeah, I mean, look, the successful ones are the ones that have always been the same. The successful ones are the ones that most resemble their vendors. Mm-hmm. So if you look at a company like, we were just talking about this the other day. I was talking about this with somebody about CDW buying Serious Computing. Mm-hmm. Now, Serious Computing has been around for, I don't know, it's been around for a long time, predates me. And Harvey Najam built a hell of a business. But that was his second act. When he founded Serious, he'd already had a career at IBM. And what did he do? He left IBM and he founded this company and he structured it exactly like IBM. And he aligned it to the IBM business units that he was going to interact with, because obviously coming out of there, he became an IBM partner. And they built up this multi-billion-dollar solution provider that just sold for multiple billions of dollars to CDW. That's a great example of this. And you can see this, and this has always been true, is that the companies that align themselves with their suppliers in terms of their operations, in terms of their business units, and the way that they even govern their own operations, tend to be better focused and more and bigger. Just to call it right out, they tend to have more revenue than the ones that are more dependent and built around skills. So that's why I'm not sure if I'm actually seeing more of it. The numbers we have in terms of business acumen remain relatively static. They go up and down 5 or 7 points whenever we go out and do this, but it definitely needs more attention. We spend a lot of time preaching about business acumen. I think one of the problems with smaller businesses, though, is that they're reticent to invest in resources they don't understand. This is particularly true with things like sales. So I could tell you I could sit here and amuse you with anecdotes all day. But I can tell you the number of times I've had conversations with MSPs where they don't have salespeople, they don't have a formal sales process. They don't, God, I can't tell you how many times I've heard somebody say, we tried marketing once and it didn't work. There's one time I'm talking with a group of MSPs and they're talking about trying to expand. I said, well, go hire a salesperson. And they said, okay, literally the guy's like, okay, write this down, hire a good salesperson. I looked at him, I go, did I say good? I just said, go get a body. And he goes, well, what if they don't work? I said, then you get rid of them and get another one. And the entire idea that you're going to be churning through people and you're going to have to go through development and you're going to have to do, and trust, like you'll find somebody and trust that they're going to do something you don't understand. It's antithetical to their thinking and their experience. And that's what holds a lot of them back. I personally think, and not to go off on a tangent from our conversation about customer experience, the biggest problem I think we face as an industry in terms of a go-to-market through channels is risk. And the advice that I give a lot of the companies that I work with is if you're going to develop programs to help partners or you want partners to do things on your behalf, you have to de-risk the process for them. And when I say de-risk, I mean just mitigated. There's always going to be some level of risk, but there has to be a means of showing that there is a greater probability of success than there is of failure.
Larry, before we wrap up, I want to circle back to something you brought up all the way at the beginning of this conversation that we didn't actually get a chance to talk about, and that is what I'll call the dangers of automation, in a sense. I mean, from a certain perspective, equating customer experience with customer service and personal service is a misconception, but allowing a tool to take over too much for relationship management is, I think, something that you're concerned about as well. So talk about your concerns in relation to automation.
Yeah, it's interesting. If you take the Amazon experience as a reference point, and you say, well, they highly automate their customer engagement. So when you go to Amazon, you don't talk to people, you find the products on your own, they'll suggest things independent of a person. If you need to make a return, the return will happen automatically. If you need information, they will send you, they actually automate the process of connecting you with other people, and other people are not even people. That's just messages that's being posted on product listings. So that entire process is automated, except it's not. That process is there. It's not because they've done a really good job of automating it, is that they've tried to anticipate everything that could go wrong and give you a way to self-correct. And if all that fails, you can go to Amazon and they will help you. And I've experienced that firsthand, is that Amazon is a wonderful customer experience and customer care department if you need to go to that level. So it's not, I'm not going to say that automation isn't automation is a bad thing. Automation allows us the opportunity to actually spend quality human time with people that we wouldn't ordinarily have if we had to engage in all of this manually. And I think that that's the important distinction, is that we should use automation as a means of freeing up time so we can humanize the true relationship.
So I ask this question a lot because I look at the generation that's coming up as a generation that is not used to human interaction, right? Do you foresee the younger generation now that's coming up as they go into business? Does that change the customer experience? Do they want that level of interaction, or do you think that they'll kind of settle into the ways things are now?
It's a really interesting question. 91% of millennials, and let's just put this in perspective, a millennial is now somebody between 30 and 40 years old. In fact, the top end of the millennial range is 42. So they're not exactly kids. These are already people who are in decision-making positions, but 92% of them prefer to buy online. 31% will only buy online when that is an option, meaning that they won't actually talk with people. Ultimately, this is a problem for the channel because the movement towards marketplaces and digital sales is disruptive. From a vendor perspective, it's fantastic because there's a huge amount of advantages in terms of the way that they price and they price, discount, and market products when they sell them online versus having to go through 1 and 2 tier channels. The buyer wants this because they've been ingrained with a salesperson is going to try to sell them on things that they don't need. That a salesperson is going to sell them, on not necessarily to offer them the best options, but to offer them the options that they want to sell. So I think it's incumbent upon sellers, whether it's a vendor, whether it's a solution provider, that they have to, do the things that are in the best interest of the customer, not just in the best interest of what they, whatever quota they're trying to retire. And it's a really interesting paradox. If you look at the way vendors operate, vendors absolutely, they just want to sell the product. And I know that this happens, we see it happen, is that the vendors will sell a customer a product whether or not the customer actually needs it. That creates the bad experience, not the fact that there's a human trying to talk to you.
See, I'm going to weigh on it for you guys because Matt, I'm going to actually challenge the basis of your question, just because older people don't understand the way younger people interact does not mean that they're not social. And I actually think this is a really critical point. Yep. Anybody who looks at teens, 20-somethings, particularly interacting online in digital methods, they are very social. They're just doing it very differently than other generations. And I think it's a massive blind spot and a problem for businesses to be dismissive and say, oh, they just aren't social. Oh no, you just don't understand them. That you have to learn their methodology because theirs will be the long-term winner on this. And if you're just saying, oh, I don't know how to get to them, yeah, you're the problem, not them. And I think this is really important for channel partners to be looking and saying, like, oftentimes, like, how do you reach those people? Yeah, you're going to have to learn their tools and you're going to have to learn their methodology if you want to sell to them.
Yeah, couldn't agree with you more, Karen.
Thank you. Matt and I are the gamers on this. I know, I'm the one hanging out with those people to talk to them.
Yeah, look,
but you've got to play on their terms.
No, look, on the other side of the wall in front of me, I've got I got a business analyst who's a gamer. How he operates is completely different the way that I was brought up. I've got a pool of writers. They're all in their 20s. I keep offering them things as like the tools that we would want to use. Like, sitting in front of me right now, I have 3 screens and I got a keyboard. I got multiple devices. I'm surrounded by stuff. They don't even want a keyboard. It's like, oh, we're good with the laptop. I was like, you sure? I'll get you whatever you need to work. And they're like, nope. So Dave's right. Dave's absolutely right. The way that they operate is a bit different than what we're used to. But like, again, what's old is new. And we tend to forget, and this is whenever anybody talks to me about, well, it's different because, I'm like, it's not different. We've dealt with this. Every successive generation goes to the same problem, or otherwise Bowie would not have written the lyrics that he did, because the World War II generation was spitting at the boomers. Well, yeah, the boomers were different to them because they had a different frame of reference and they had different tools. And so, yeah, the kids coming up behind us, they have different tools too. But, and frankly, we should be looking to them and learning from them.
Mm-hmm. So the customer, you still need to provide a good customer experience, but the way you deliver that customer experience is going to differ based on how they communicate and their processes for social interaction.
Well, look, it's simple rule of thumb here. Is that how do you deliver a good customer experience? Ask the customer. I mean, it's not rocket science. It's, the customer, and here's the thing is that one of the things that customers are actually getting better at, even if we're not, the customer's imagination is greater than ours. So we, as technologists, we tend to be blinded by our creation. And I'll never forget, I was having dinner with an old friend. He's a mechanical engineer. He designs hematology equipment. I mean, it's just stuff that's like absolutely like mind-blowingly, brilliant to me. And, it's almost like magic. But and we're talking about this entire phenomenon. And he goes, I'm an engineer. I'll design you anything you want. Doesn't mean you can use it. And if you've worked with coders are great for this. You say, I need an application. They'll make an application. They'll do exactly what you want. You'll never be able to touch it because they didn't build it for you. They built it for them. And so but the customer, though, we've been feeding the customer this steady diet now for about 15 years that says you can do anything with technology. And they are now thinking that, they have a problem. There's got to be a solution for it somewhere. And now they reach out to companies like your listeners. They give them the advice and guidance, and they assume that they know what they're doing. That's the expectation. And so if you want to know how the customer wants to be treated, what the customer's expectations are, ask the customer.
Which is not rocket science, unless the customer is a rocket scientist, then that might complicate things a little bit. But that's a joke. Yeah, thanks, Dad. Truth is though, is that right across the street from my office, there's a $300 million reseller, and know them very well. Won't say who they are, but one of their managers asked, do you have any data that tells us what the customers want from us? Like, ask the customer. The customer does. The customer wants it's really, there's some baseline stuff that the customer looks for. And the customer wants the same things we want. They want ease of doing business. They want simplified terms. They want expeditious delivery. They want fair pricing, not necessarily best pricing. Rich, you may recall, as I said it during my presentation, 55% of customers will pay more for a better experience. So if you can demonstrate to them that you are giving them a superior experience, then they will spend more with you. And in fact, the same data that we were referencing out of that presentation shows that at the purchase, the time, the first purchase, price is an issue. On the renewal, it's less of an issue if the experience was good. That's a real touch point.
And by the way, don't miss what Larry just said there, because there's so much of a race to the bottom on pricing. I mean, and don't play that game. Seriously, listeners, don't play the race to the bottom game. There's people will pay more for better. You want to play in the boutique, in the specialized, in the specialized, in the luxury. You want to play in those spaces. You don't want to play at the race to the bottom.
That's a good point. And unfortunately, we are out of time. So that's a good place to wrap. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Larry. Larry, first of all, thank you for being on and joining us. A fascinating interview. We could go on to this topic, I think, for another hour, because there's just so much to cover, and it's a lot to think about, and a lot to the whole process, right? So it's really good. But if for those who want to, who maybe want to pick your brain more, learn more about Channelnomics, learn more about you, get in touch with you, where can they go? How can they find you?
Come on, channelnomics.com. You can, find me, find the rest of the Channelnomics team there.
Fantastic. We'll make sure we put a link to the show notes for this episode 204. Go and find that, and then you can link to that site and check that out. Are you on the socials and stuff too?
I presume so.
He thinks so. Look there, and if you don't find them, just the website. Yeah, no.
If you just, I'm just going to apologize. If you find me on social media, I'm just going to apologize now.
Fair enough. And with that, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, Dave Sobel will be still with us on the other side to break down the end of the show and have a little bit of fun. We will see you on the other side. And we are back now with part 3 of ChannelPro Weekly. Rich, Dave, a fascinating interview with Larry Walsh. We could have gone on, I think.
We could do another show.
Right, that could be an entire episode in and of itself. Anything you want to highlight? Any takeaways from that, Rich, Dave, that you want to mention?
Well, again, focus on making what he's talking about executable. Think about the thing you're going to do in your business that makes a little bit of difference, because, I mean, Larry's a smart analyst. He's giving you the pieces. It's your job to make that implementable.
And I'll just add on to that one maybe starting point for that. And I think Larry would agree this is like the training wheels version of what he's talking about. But almost 100% of the people listening or watching right now sell Microsoft 365. Microsoft 365 is full of stuff that people don't even know is there, don't know how to use. Part of delivering that, staying engaged with the customer and delivering a great customer experience can be, once you've signed up that new subscriber or become the partner of record, helping them learn how to use all this stuff that they're already paying for and don't know about.
And that's a money-making opportunity, I would assume, right? It's good customer experience, but it's also opportunity to make more revenue, right? Like,
hard things. That's where the money is.
Right. Hard things earn money. That's what you said, Dave, and that is absolutely true. So good stuff. So we have a little bit of time. Dave, one of the reasons why I love having you on is because you're like me. You're kind of a nerd in a good way. A good
big nerd. Total big nerd.
And you also have a lot of old, really cool stuff. Now, I've recently kind of admitted defeat, and I've exhausted my museum of interesting things to talk about. I mentioned, like, I've got drawers and bins of old graphics cards and audio cards and network cards, but like, you can talk about one of them. Talking about 20 of them is not very interesting over the course of the time. So I'll have new stuff that I have. On occasion, I'll have something new or old or something that now qualifies as museum that I can talk about. But you have lots and lots of things also.
Tons of museum pieces. And this is debate. And next time, I've got the really old one to show you. But I actually think I'm going to do one that's an interesting bit. I have these two. So for those that see, this is a Dragon's Lair Replicade. They have recreated in 1/6 scale the original Dragon's Lair arcade cabinet, which I have just flipped on to boot up. And it is the full game running on actual hardware that you can have. I have a Street Fighter 2 as well, but this is the newer one. And it boots up and it plays the game and it makes tons of noise, which I just flipped on. And these are super fun. They just put out 1943, I think, and 1942 and 1943 is one of these. And they're great fun. It's just
that's cool. So now, does the Street Fighter one, is that like,
see?
Is that playable? Oh, there we go. There's the Dragon Lair.
Oh, it is fully playable. I can press the front, put coins in, and then hit start, and off it goes. There's the game.
So by playable, I mean like Street Fighter 2 is, 6 buttons and a joystick. And is it hard to play at that scale?
It's interesting to play at that scale. It's a little different. You're definitely not doing competition, but it supports the Street Fighter 2 one supports a gamepad. So I could actually plug in my USB gamepad and play against it if I want to go that scale. It's both a novelty and an interesting way to play. That's cool. So so you have Dragon's Lair, you got Street Fighter 2. I have Dragon's Lair and I have Street Fighter 2 are the two of the series that I've picked up. They've got different versions of these in Pac-Man and Galaga and some of the classics and stuff like that. But those were two. Street Fighter 2 is my kind of go-to game. And the Dragon's Lair cabinet in particular is just such a cool, unique cabinet and style of game that I just had to have it. Yeah, I was never actually a huge Dragon Lair fan, believe it or not. I actually do have it for the Xbox, mostly because it was one of the few games on the Xbox that supported 1080p output. Yep. Kind of a nerdy reason to own it. Oh yeah, we've gone way down the rabbit. I like it also for sort of its cultural, historical significance, because it was sort of the first Laserdisc game, and it was the first of that sort of full motion video. And I just thought it was a particularly cool looking cabinet. So it was a cool cabinet. No argument there. Rich, were you a big Dragon Lair fan? Did you play a lot of that back in the day?
I did not. I'm a little more familiar with Street Fighter 2, but yeah, not at all with Dragon's Lair.
So, Dave, last question for you, because we're almost out of time. What is, if you could dream up, if you have a Street Fighter, one other arcade cabinet like that and that scale for them to make, what would be like the one you'd want the most? So next up would be the classics Star Wars. The original arcade game with the vector graphics would be the one I'd want. Like as that's there's those arcade 1-ups that are the like 3/4 size, but that's too big for my house. So I would love to have the classic Star Wars arcade game with the vector graphics. Yeah, that would be pretty cool. That would be pretty cool. Awesome stuff. Well, we don't have time for a tech pick. But Dave, thank you for bringing that on. I look forward to whatever you have to show us next time, because you always have a lot of interesting stuff that I don't have. Rich, with that, why don't you tell us what we might have missed and what's coming up next week?
Well, as I quickly go over there, because I'm totally unprepared for the end of the show, you know what? If you want to know what's going on out in the industry that you may have missed, the best thing to do is go to ChannelProNetwork.com every Friday for our In Case You Missed It post written by our own James Gaskin. Intel held its innovation event, which is actually a new thing yesterday. They made some announcements there. James will take you through that. He's got an acquisition for Kaspersky for you, some new software from Avanti, and a story about what I think you will agree after you read about this is the world's stupidest hiker. You'll get the details on that from James. And then coming up for next week, Channel Partners, the Channel Partners Conference in Las Vegas is happening. I am actually going to be there most of the week. The ASCII group is doing its latest event in the Washington, D.C. area. We will have, ChannelPro will have boots on the ground at that event as well. And then in Santa Clara, California, face-to-face, for the first time since the pandemic, IoT World happens. That's all coming up next week.
Sounds like fascinating stuff. You won't want to miss it. And where can you read all about it, folks? ChannelProNetwork.com is the website. Go there each and every day. Set it as your homepage. You'll find news, articles, resources, white papers, downloads, all kinds of things to keep you on top of what's going on and help you make your business better, more profitable, serve your customers better, all that stuff. Go there each and every day. Really important. Of course, subscribe to Channel Pro Weekly. We're on YouTube. You can watch there. We're also on every podcast place. So wherever you get your podcasts, you'll find us there. Make sure you subscribe and keep with us each and every week as we dive through the news. You also might want to think about subscribing to Dave's podcast as well, The Business of Tech. Dave, tell them where they can find it and where they can find more about you.
The easiest place to find it is businessof.tech, where there's a big blue button to get you on all the platforms, including there's a YouTube version that comes out every Friday if you want to get it in video form with the entire week's worth of episodes, or any of the podcasts across the network are on mspradio.com.
Go there and check it out. And you're on the socials and stuff, I assume?
I'm on all the socials. I am incredibly easy to find and hang out in a bunch of the Slack groups and the Reddit group and the Discord. I am very easy to find.
Awesome. Well, Dave, we love having you on. Thank you so much for being here. Hope you had a good time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, guys.
Good. Can't wait to have you back. And with that, we're going to wrap up episode 204 here. Big thanks to Dave Sobel. Big thanks to Larry Walsh. We will see everybody in episode 205 next week.